Hello, everyone. Mr. K here. We're going to talk about brakes today. We're kind of getting into the meat and potatoes of this class now. And there are going to be several parts to brakes, but today we're going to talk about some of the basics. Just to kind of throw something interesting in there, why don't you go ahead and pause my video and watch what's on the screen here. Punch that in to your URL or search on YouTube for tests show most automatic braking systems don't work with pedestrians. And go ahead and pause my video and do that now. Okay, you should have just watched that video, and it is a few years old, but just kind of gives you an interesting take on automatic braking systems, which, by the way, if you're not familiar with those, do not confuse that with ABS. Not the same thing. We're going to talk about that today. Okay, so in regards to the brake systems, like I said, we're just starting today. This is just going to be basic operation, nomenclature, terminology, a little bit about the different components. We're going to get into drum versus disc on a different day, and parking brake systems on a different day, and how to bleed them on a different day. Today is just kind of learn what they are and a little bit about each part. All right. So we're going to talk about the functions of the brakes. Why do we have brakes on the car? It may seem obvious, but there's probably one that's going to surprise you there. Basic terminology, proportioning valves, and ABS systems. So first of all, the first function of brakes. So I'm going to ask you, what do brakes do? And you're probably thinking, well, they stop the car. True. Okay, let me ask you a little more in-depth question. When you apply the brakes, it takes away from the speed of the car, right? It slows the car down. So you're taking mechanical energy and you're transforming it into something, because we know from physics that you can never destroy energy. You can only turn it into something else, a different form of energy. You can change it, you can move it around, but you can't destroy it. Okay. So you're going 80 miles an hour and you slam on the brakes. Those brakes grab those essentially the wheels that grab the brake discs or the brake drums, and they're changing that mechanical energy into heat. Okay, thermal energy. Go ahead and watch this video at this time. Pause mine and go ahead and watch this video. Okay, you should have just watched that video, and you can see as that vehicle goes around the curves and hits the brakes, it just glows those rotors bright orange. So, and that's real. That's not just for that video. It's not special effects or anything. That really does happen. So brakes are under a tremendous amount of pressure, especially on race cars, big trucks, that type of thing, and they get glowing hot. One other thing that brakes do, they don't just turn mechanical energy into thermal energy. They also turn mechanical energy into electric energy. So on some vehicles, certain hybrids, I guess you'd say, or vehicles that have electric motors, battery packs, that type of thing, when you hit the brakes, a lot of the braking may actually be done by activating a generator that the wheels are going to spin, which then produces power and recharges the battery pack for the vehicle. I've never worked on a vehicle that does this. I'm not a big, haven't had a lot of hybrid stuff come in, and you guys probably won't either. So I don't go into depth on this particular topic, but I just want you to know that it does exist. It is out there. So that's called regenerative braking. And of course, the end goal here is to stop your car, right? That's both of these, whether it be regenerative braking or just standard brakes that convert it to heat energy, it's going to stop your car. Okay. So there we go. Talk about the couple functions of brakes, couple things they can do. They can stop your car and they can charge a battery. Let's go into some terminology. All right, a lot of parts to a brake system. We're just going to talk about some real basic big parts today. I don't want to, not going to throw everything at you at once, so we're not going to overwhelm you. We're just going to talk about the main chunks of brake systems. All right. So I'm going to start with about 1960s era brakes. You're probably never going to work on a car older than that, so I'm not going to go older than that. They're not a whole lot different. In fact, they're probably simpler, but I'm just going to start with 60s just to keep it simple here. So about 60s to 70s, this is the type of system you're most likely going to see. You're probably going to see disc brakes in the front of the car. You're probably going to see drum brakes in the back. If you don't know what the difference is between the two, don't worry about it yet. That's coming on another day. You're probably going to see a brake pedal in the car that goes to a master cylinder, which is full of brake fluid. And as you pump that brake pedal, it pushes into the master cylinder, which then compresses brake fluid. Doesn't compress it, that's the wrong word. Creates pressure, puts the brake fluid under pressure in the lines, and then pushes that brake fluid through these lines to a proportioning valve, okay, or metering valve, which we'll talk about a few slides later, and then out to your brakes. Okay, and that brake pressure in the lines then causes these brake calipers to compress and clamp down on a rotating disc, and it slows your car down. Pretty simple. Not a lot to go wrong on these. Great, easy to work on, great system. Okay, 60s and 70s. 70s through 90s. The main difference here is, I probably shouldn't have said proportioning valve in the previous slide, because these aren't always proportioning. These are a lot of times just a splitter. Let's say that's a splitter valve. So it's just one line comes out of here, it splits it to the front. One line comes out of here, it splits it to the rear. But 70s through 90s, we start looking at same type of system, but you've got a brake booster now that makes it easier for your foot to push down on the pedal. I guess they just didn't want people to work as hard. So you've got a brake booster, and then you have a proportioning valve that we'll talk about what a proportioning valve does. I'm not going to get into that on this slide. But big difference, again, from 50s to 60s, jump to 70s through 90s, you've got the brake booster and you've got a proportioning valve, okay? Now let's talk about 1990s through current. ABS, okay? What does ABS stand for? Anti-lock brakes. And once you get into ABS, it's a whole nother world of complexity, okay? Notice your proportioning valve is gone. ABS typically takes the place of that. All right, ABS, you still got the same brake pedal with a brake booster that makes it easier to press the pedal. Still got a master cylinder. You still got brakes in the front wheels, brakes in the rear wheels, and brake lines connecting them. But you have a hydraulic control unit for the ABS here in the middle, or you have an ABS block, also called an ABS pump. But the point is, this feeds pressure into that ABS block. The ABS block then has to decide how much pressure to give to each wheel. Okay. How does it decide? Well, each wheel has a wheel speed sensor, or also called an ABS sensor, also called a vehicle speed sensor. Okay. Each wheel has one of those sensors, and yes, they do go bad, and yes, they're a pain to replace. Those sensors detect how fast each wheel on the car is going. Those report back to the BCM, is what's called in a lot of vehicles, body control module, which is a computer that takes all these signals and figures out which wheel might be on ice or skidding, and then tells the ABS block, hey, you need to lighten up some pressure to that wheel so it stops skidding. Okay. We're going to watch a video on ABS, so don't stress over that much. Really, what I want you to get out of this slide is that starting in about the 90s is when a lot of vehicles started getting ABS, and that just changed the whole ball game on brakes. All right, so we brought up some kind of funny terms. If you're not familiar with brake systems, I brought up some new things, so let's talk a little more about those in depth. Let's talk about proportioning valves to start. Okay, remember proportioning valves were, let me jump back. We're talking 70s through 90s technology. In fact, I even saw one of these on a 2010 that I worked on. Couldn't believe it had one, but it did. And it had ABS, but it had proportioning valve also. Imagine that. But typically 70s through 90s is what you see this on. So proportioning valve. They are typically right after the master cylinder in this area under the hood here. Here's another diagram. If you were to open the hood, here's the engine, master cylinder, proportioning valve's right there. Okay. And I'm already gonna ask you, what does it do? Well, what a proportioning valve does is if you slam on the brakes without a proportioning valve, if you just have the old style 50s and 60s brakes, you slam on the brakes on a car, all four wheels will lock up and start skidding if the brakes are good enough. When that happens, especially if you're in any kind of curve, the back end can start sliding out from under you and just whip right around like that. And you've got a real dangerous situation. So proportioning valve backs off the pressure on the rear wheels. So if you stomp the brakes, the rear wheels get less pressure than the front, so that you end up with more of a controlled stop, like what this BMW is doing, instead of what this red car is doing. This time, go ahead and stop my video and watch both of these. The top one is going to show you a vehicle that's stopping with a correctly working proportioning valve. So go ahead and watch that. And then the bottom one is going to show you a vehicle. Let's see, how to control Rubo is just an example of a skid if perhaps a proportioning valve wasn't working. So go ahead and watch those now. All right. You should have watched those videos. The bottom one, you only need to watch 10 seconds of it. I just want you to see that sideways skid. But that would be an example of proportioning valve wasn't working right. Okay, so proportioning valve is one thing we brought up that sounded kind of funny if you're not familiar with brake systems. Let's bring up one more thing. ABS. ABS stands for anti-lock braking system. All right, we already talked a little bit about this. ABS it's still going to have a brake pedal. It's still going to have brake booster, master cylinder, pressure lines, okay, brakes on the front and rear wheels. That doesn't change. But the ABS is going to have, of course, a control module and a ABS pump or ABS block or whatever you want to call it that decides when and how much pressure goes to each one of these brakes. I don't have another slide on ABS. And the reason is because I've got a kind of a long video here that I'd like you to watch. It's very informative. So go ahead and just pause my video and watch this video at this time. Okay, you should have just watched that video. Let's move on. Oh. I answered this earlier. Is there a proportioning valve in ABS brakes? Okay. Very, very, very rarely. I'm going to say almost never. I think I've seen it once, but typically not a proportioning valve because the ABS system will take care of the issue of skidding wheels. If a wheel's skidding, it will lighten up the brake pressure on that wheel anyway. So typically not a proportioning valve in ABS brakes. All right. At this point in time, go ahead and knock out your assignment on brake systems, part 1. And have a good day.